Welcome to West Film, where every movie has a story worth telling. From heart-pounding action to twisty mysteries and dramas that stick with you, we dig into the plot, the characters, and the moments that make each film worth your time. So grab a seat, get comfortable, and let's jump into today's movie. This is West Film, your story starts here. Divergent, story recap and review. Once the initiates arrive, they're split into two groups, those born into Dauntless, and the transfers who came from other factions. The Dauntless-born recruits train under an instructor named Lauren, while Trice, Christina, and the rest of the transfers are handed over to a trainer everyone simply calls For. Christina, never one to hold her tongue, immediately teases him about his name, asking if 4 is really just a number. When he answers without missing a beat, she pushes further, joking that all the better numbers were probably already taken. 4 doesn't lose his cool, but he does warn her that in Dauntless, blurting out every thought that crosses your mind isn't always the smartest move. He then leads the transfers through headquarters and into the pit at the sprawling, chaotic heart of Dauntless life. It's loud. It's crowded, people are laughing, sparring, eating, climbing, and living with an intensity Trice has never encountered before. For someone raised to be quiet and unnoticed, it's overwhelming, but there's something thrilling about it too. As she trails behind 4, she notices the tattoo curling up his neck, and her curiosity about him only deepens. Everything here feels foreign, yet she can't stop being drawn to it. Eventually 4 brings the group to their sleeping quarters for the next 10 weeks, explaining that it's fully communal and no privacy, no separation. Christina reacts instantly and loudly when she spots the shared bathrooms, complaining without any filter. 4 simply reminds her that Dauntless doesn't hide much of anything. There's very little line between public and private life here. For Christina, raised in candor and used to blunt honesty, the setup is uncomfortable but somehow still fits her personality. Soon after, the recruits trade their old clothing for Dauntless uniforms and burn what they left behind, a symbolic farewell to their old identities. For Trice, watching the plain gray of abnegation go up in flames feels like watching a piece of her old self disappear too. Afterward, the group heads to the cafeteria, where Trice sits with Christina and meets more transfers, including Will and Al. Their conversation turns into some good-natured ribbing about the different factions, everyone weighing in on what they like and dislike about the world they left. For a moment, Trice actually feels like she might belong somewhere. That feeling doesn't last, though. The sound of cups striking tables ripples through the room, and everyone snaps to attention as the Dauntless leadership arrives. The initiates stand alongside the rest of the faction while the commander delivers a speech meant to stir up courage and loyalty. For Trice, it drives home a harder truth. Choosing Dauntless was only step 1. Now she has to actually survive it. The Dauntless leader tells the recruits that bravery isn't something you admire from the sidelines, it's something you have to live out, day after day, through your choices. He urges them to trust their instincts, believe in their own strength, and take the responsibility of wearing the Dauntless name seriously. His words send the whole cafeteria into a frenzy, with veteran members cheering and hoisting the new initiates up in celebration. But the excitement is short-lived, because training starts almost immediately. The initiation is split into 2 major phases. The first is about physical survival, stamina, combat, speed, accuracy, raw toughness. The second is designed to dismantle the initiates psychologically, forcing them to confront fears they'd normally bury. Together, these stages are meant to reshape uncertain recruits into hardened Dauntless members, and it's obvious from the start that not everyone will make it. Tensions run high almost immediately, especially since many transfers arrive already distrustful of one another thanks to old faction rivalries. Eric's training style only adds fuel to that fire. He's harsh, unforgiving, and leans on fear and humiliation to push people. 4, by contrast, is strict but far more controlled. He watches closely, corrects mistakes, and doesn't believe cruelty is the only way to teach a lesson. During one early session, Eric decides to make an example of the group by pitting the first jumper against the last. Since Trice jumped first, she's thrown into the ring and she's nowhere near ready. Her opponent overwhelms her almost instantly, and after taking hit after hit, her body finally gives out and she blacks out. When she wakes up, the harsh reality of Dauntless hits even harder. Eric has posted the rankings, and her name is dangerously close to the bottom. If she doesn't turn things around fast, she'll be cut and forced to live factionless. What once felt like freedom now feels like a countdown to failure. Seeing how discouraged she is, her friends try to lift her spirits by getting tattoos together, something that feels almost like a rite of passage in Dauntless culture. At the parlor, Trice runs into Torai, the woman who administered her aptitude test. Torai recognizes her instantly and quietly questions why she'd choose Dauntless, knowing full well the risk tied to her results. But Trice insists this wasn't some accident, she wanted this, and she's determined to earn her place. Rather than wait to be exposed again in training, Trice starts waking up before everyone else to practice alone, sharpening her form and building strength in private. Thor notices. During training, he points out her weak spots and teaches her to rely on timing and strategy rather than raw power, explaining that when she can't overpower someone, she needs to find the places where even a stronger opponent is vulnerable. Trice is grateful for the guidance, but she's also acutely aware of how close he's standing. As he adjusts her stance and shows her where to strike, she starts noticing him in a different way. His calm, his focus, the mystery surrounding him. Even in the middle of all this danger, something quieter is starting to build between them. Not long after, another brutal lesson unfolds when Christina is pushed too far in a sparring match and eventually taps out. To Eric, giving up is unforgivable. As punishment, he has her dragged outside and forced to dangle from the edge of a bridge with nothing but a fatal drop beneath her. Water drips down from above, slowly loosening her grip, while everyone watches Eric time how long she can hang on. Just as her strength is about to give out completely, Eric orders her pulled back up. The message lands hard. In Dauntless, fear is expected and pain is part of the deal, but quitting is the one thing that isn't tolerated. Later, Thor takes the initiates outside the compound on a short tour. As they head toward the wall, he explains that even though Chicago has stayed quiet for years, peace should never be taken for granted. Dauntless exists precisely to stay ready. Beyond the compound lie the Amity farmlands, still scarred from the war that wrecked the old world. Christina jokes that there has to be something dangerous or strange out past the fence, because nobody builds a wall like that for no reason. Training continues, and Trice starts to shine in unexpected places. During knife-throwing practice, nearly every blade she throws lands true, revealing a precision and focus few expected from her. Al, on the other hand, struggles badly, and one of his knives slips from his grip. Eric orders it picked up, but Al, terrified of hurting someone or getting hurt himself, refuses. Eric's response is chillingly calm but cruel. He orders Al to stand still in front of the target while Thor throws knives around him, close enough to terrify him but not meant to actually hit. If Al flinches even once, he's out. The room goes dead silent as everyone grasps how dangerous this is. Unable to watch her friend go through it, Trice steps forward and takes his place. Eric allows it. Thor begins throwing, blade after blade landing closer and closer, and Trice forces herself to stay still despite the fear tearing through her until one knife nicks her ear and blood starts running down her face. That's enough to end the demonstration, and Eric rewards her courage with extra points. To him, it was never about kindness, it was about discipline and proving fear can be mastered. Trice is furious at Thor at first, assuming he meant to hurt her, but she later realizes the cut wasn't intentional. If anything, it was what ended the ordeal before it could go any further. Stepping in for Al earns Trice real respect among the other initiates, as she's no longer seen as just the quiet abnegation girl who shouldn't have lasted this long. But that new respect brings unwanted attention too. Peter, a cruel and arrogant transfer from Kanda, seems determined to knock her down, mocking her constantly and questioning whether she's earned her place. Unlike the others, he doesn't treat training as something they're all struggling through together. To him, it's a chance to dominate anyone weaker. Things get more complicated when Jeanine Matthews, the powerful leader of Erudite, shows up inside the compound. Her presence rattles Trice, who's been on edge ever since Torai warned her to keep her divergence hidden, and seeing Jeanine so close to Dauntless makes that fear feel very real. During another sparring session, Eric deliberately pairs Trice against Peter, knowing the bad blood between them. Before the fight, For quietly gives Trice pointers on Peter's weaknesses, reminding her that strength isn't the only path to victory. She lands the first real hit, striking Peter's throat, but his wounded pride turns the fight vicious. He comes back at her with far more aggression than before, and despite her best efforts, Trice is overwhelmed and knocked unconscious again. As she drifts in and out of consciousness afterward, she catches a blurry glimpse of Thor walking away from the ring before everything goes black. When she finally wakes, her situation looks even worse. Her poor combat record has put her right on the edge of being cut from Dauntless entirely. But instead of accepting defeat, she forces herself up and chases down the departing train the other initiates have already boarded. She's clearly in no shape to keep up, but she pushes through anyway. Even Eric looks surprised by her refusal to quit. Thor reaches out and pulls her aboard, and seeing her determination, Eric ultimately lets her stay. Next comes something very different. A capture the flag competition using special training guns. These weapons don't actually injure anyone, but their rounds trigger the nerves to simulate real pain, making the game feel dangerously serious. When it's time to pick teams, Eric goes for pure muscle, choosing the strongest fighters. Thor takes a smarter approach, picking people who are quick, sharp, and motivated instead. Once they reach the location, Eric sets his team up defensively at the far end of the pier, while Thor's team actually talks strategy together and listens to each other's ideas. Spotting a nearby Ferris wheel, Trice realizes it could offer a view of the entire battlefield and starts climbing without waiting for permission. Thor follows, both to help her and to scout from above. But as they climb, Trice notices something surprising. The usually composed Thor is clearly uneasy with the height, even though he tries to hide it. Then a weakened support beam gives way beneath Trice's foot, and she slips, grabbing for anything to hold on to. Thor catches her just in time and pulls her close. In that moment, Trice realizes Thor is afraid of heights, and she teases him about it, for once catching a glimpse of a lighter, more playful side of her usually serious instructor. Their brief exchange adds another layer to the connection growing between them. From up top, Trice spots the opposing team's flag near the lighthouse and quickly comes up with a plan. Part of the team draws Eric's group away as a distraction while Thor handles their captain, leaving Trice and the others free to grab the flag. It works. Trice fights her way through confrontations with Peter and Molly and reaches the flag first, securing the win for her team. For the first time, she's not just surviving dauntless training, she's proving she can now think and outmaneuver people who never expected it from her. Afterward, the rest of Dauntless starts treating Trice with newfound warmth, inviting her into a Dauntless tradition where she's strapped into a zipline and sent soaring above the city. The rush of speed, height, and city lights is overwhelming, and she can barely contain her excitement when she lands. Thor is waiting for her, congratulating her on the win and acknowledging that she's earned this moment. Having cleared the first stage of initiation, Trice now moves into something far more dangerous, a phase built entirely around fear rather than strength. As the group moves through the city on assignment, Trice gets an unexpected chance to see her mother, Natalie Pryor. The reunion is emotional, but it turns serious quickly when Trice confides in her mother about the secret she's been carrying since her aptitude test. Natalie confirms what Trice feared: she really is divergent and warns her to be extremely careful, especially around erudite, hinting that the psychological tests can be manipulated by someone who knows what they're doing. It becomes clear that her mother understands far more about Dauntless, erudite, and divergence than she's ever let on. When Trice arrives for the next stage of testing, she watches Molly come out of her simulation looking dazed and disconnected, as though part of her mind is still trapped inside whatever she just faced. It's unsettling, but Trice has no choice but to proceed. Under Four's supervision, she enters her own simulation, where she must confront her fears and prove she can face them with courage. Once inside, the world feels completely real, and she's forced to work through the things that terrify her most until she realizes they're only illusions conjured by her own mind. When she wakes up, only 3 minutes have passed, and Four is visibly thrown by how fast she finished. Most initiates take far longer. Her ability to recognize the fears as fake and break through them so quickly is impressive and deeply suspicious. The other initiates come out of their own simulations shaken, and Trice's unusually strong results start drawing attention. Peter uses it to stir up suspicion, pointing out how quickly she's climbing the rankings and hinting that something's different about her, even suggesting her influence might be affecting others, including Al, which only deepens the tension in the group. During her second fear simulation, Trice finds herself sealed inside a glass cube filling with water. Instead of panicking, she studies her surroundings and breaks the glass to escape, waking up again with the same unnatural speed. Four can't ignore it any longer. He keeps pressing her about her actual aptitude test results, wanting to know which faction she was truly meant for. Trice keeps insisting it was abnegation, but Four clearly senses something isn't adding up. Later, Torai opens up further, revealing that her own brother was also divergent, able to move through fear simulations too fast, just like Trice, using methods the system wasn't built to handle. Once people noticed, he turned up dead at the bottom of the chasm. Her warning is blunt: if anyone in Dauntless discovers what Trice really is, her life is in danger. Shaken by this, Trice starts to wonder whether choosing Dauntless was a mistake. Desperate, she goes to her brother Caleb, hoping he'll help her return to abnegation, but he refuses, having already committed himself to erudite and unwilling to take the risk. Her rejection leaves her feeling more isolated than ever. On her way out, she runs into Jeanine Matthews in the stairwell. Jeanine is warm and composed on the surface, inviting Trice into her office, but there's something calculating beneath it. She steers the conversation toward divergence, describing divergence as a threat to social order and hinting that abnegation might be sheltering them. She never accuses Trice outright, but every word feels like a test, including a pointed remark about hoping Trice would stay loyal to the system if someone close to her broke the law. The implication is impossible to miss. Jeanine is watching her, and may already suspect more than she's saying. After the meeting, Jeanine has Trice driven back to Dauntless, but that night, danger catches up with her fast. 3 masked attackers ambush her and try to drag her toward the chasm, planning to stage her death as an accidental fall. In the struggle, Trice recognizes one of them, Al. Before they can finish, Four arrives and fights the attackers off, saving her and staying by her side until morning. The betrayal cuts deep, especially since Al had always seemed gentle rather than dangerous. The next day, he begs Trice for forgiveness, clearly consumed by guilt, but she can't bring herself to forgive someone who nearly helped kill her. Not long after, Al's body is pulled from the chasm. His death devastates Trice, and even though she was the one attacked, she can't stop blaming herself. As the danger around her intensifies, Trice starts trusting for more than anyone else and eventually tells him the truth. She's divergent. Rather than turn her in, he decides to help her, explaining that she needs to learn to pass the fear simulations like an ordinary initiate would and not simply break through them the way a divergent naturally can. Through this training, Trice learns that a person's fear landscape reveals something deeply personal about them, and that the number of fears someone carries can even be tied to the name they choose. When Four shows her his own fear landscape, she discovers his name isn't random at all. It comes from the 4 fears buried inside him. Watching his final fear play out, she starts to understand the pain hidden behind his controlled exterior. The truth about Four finally comes into focus. He's not just a mysterious instructor with a guarded past. His real name is Tobias Eaton, son of Marcus Eaton, the powerful abnegation leader. There had always been rumors that Marcus abused his son. Rumors Trice's father refused to believe, but after seeing what lives inside Four's fear landscape, Trice understands those rumors were true all along. The calm, controlled man everyone knows as Four has spent his life quietly surviving the damage his father left behind. That night, the distance between them starts to close. In a quieter, more honest moment, Trice asks about the tattoo hidden under his shirt, and he lets her see it had the symbols of all 5 factions spread across his back. As she traces the marks, she understands what they mean to him. He refuses to be confined to a single label. He wants dauntless courage, abnegation, selflessness, erudite intelligence, candor, honesty, and amity peace, to be a whole person rather than a product of a divided system. With quiet honesty, he admits kindness is still something he's working on. That vulnerability draws them closer, and they share a passionate kiss, though Trice gently pulls back, wanting to take things slowly rather than rush. The next day, Four shows her something troubling. Erudite members are quietly unloading equipment inside Dauntless territory, which is already strange given the 2 factions shouldn't be collaborating this secretly. He reveals a vial he found among the supplies, a mind control serum capable of turning independent people into obedient soldiers. If Erudite can use it on Dauntless, they could build an army that follows orders without question. Soon after, the final initiation test arrives. Tori and Four both wish Trice luck before she's placed into the simulation, which will determine whether she officially becomes Dauntless. Though for her, the real stakes are surviving it without exposing her divergence. The simulation throws her straight into chaos. Aggressive crows attack from every direction, and she fights them off with a burning stick before the scene shifts and she's suddenly tied to a post as flames close in. The ropes burn against her skin as she struggles free. Then she plunges her burned hands into a nearby swamp for relief, only for the world to shift again into a glass tank filling with water. Thinking fast, she uses her clothing to block the water source and stop herself from drowning. Then the simulation turns personal, twisting the previous night's intimacy with Four into something frightening, him pushing too hard, trying to control her. Trice fights back against the feeling of powerlessness, refusing to be dominated, and breaks free of the simulation by confronting that fear head-on. When she wakes, Jeanine is there, calmly congratulating her on passing, but the test isn't quite over. Jeanine hands her a gun and orders her to shoot her own parents, who suddenly appear in front of her inside the simulation. For one agonizing moment, Trice is forced to face the impossible choice, then she pulls the trigger and wakes up for real. With the final test behind them, the Dauntless leader delivers a proud speech to the newly minted members, who are lined up while trackers are implanted into them under orders from their superiors. At first it looks routine, but Trice quickly senses something's off. Her friends dress in silence, and the rest of Dauntless stands eerily still, almost like empty shells waiting for instructions. When one member suddenly resists and questions what's happening, he's shot in the forehead without hesitation. Trice's worst fear is confirmed. This serum doesn't just track people, it controls them. Her divergent mind stays free, but showing it would get her killed instantly, so she forces herself to mimic the blank, mechanical movements of everyone around her. The newly controlled Dauntless are armed, organized, and loaded onto a train like an invading force. On board, Trice carefully checks whether 4 is also under the serum's control. The moment their eyes meet, they both understand the truth. He's still himself too. Relief passes between them, and they quietly hold hands, realizing they might be the only 2 people in the group whose minds are still their own. The train arrives in Abnegation, and the controlled soldiers begin storming through the streets, dragging residents from their homes and herding them into one location. At the very faction meant to be protected now being brutalized by the people sworn to defend it. Trice and 4 race toward her parents' house but find her family has already avoided the raid. While moving through the streets, they run into Eric and another soldier. Eric, assuming 4 should be under the serum's control like everyone else, seizes the chance to finally have power over his old rival and points a gun at 4's head, ready to kill him. Trice can't let that happen. She raises her weapon and aims at Eric. He mocks her, certain she won't have the nerve to pull the trigger, but she proves him wrong, telling him she's human, not a mindless machine, and shoots him in the leg. The confrontation exposes them both, and dauntless soldiers quickly surround them, dragging them before Jeanine Matthews, who lays out her reasoning with chilling confidence. Abnegation, in her view, has become a threat to the faction system, and divergents are too dangerous to leave unchecked, since they can't be manipulated or controlled. Jeanine takes 4 away and orders Trice's execution. Before it can happen, Natalie Pryor appears and saves her daughter and Trice is stunned to see just how capable her mother is, especially when it becomes clear Natalie once belonged to Dauntless herself. Together, mother and daughter try to escape and reach Trice's father and the other abnegation leaders, but during the escape, Natalie is shot. She uses her final moments to shield Trice, sacrificing herself so her daughter can keep moving. Devastated but unable to stop, Trice presses on and finds her brother Caleb with their father, Andrew Pryor. Caleb has finally recognized what Erudite is doing and has chosen to leave them behind. Trice also spots Marcus Eaton and, now knowing the truth about what he did to his son, can barely look at him without disgust. When she tells her father that Natalie died protecting her, the news hits him hard, but there's no time to grieve. The group has to stop Erudite before the controlled Dauntless finish their massacre of abnegation. Trice leads them toward the Dauntless stronghold, capturing Peter along the way and forcing him to guide them to the control room running the simulation. As they close in on the command center, Andrew realizes there's no safe way through, so he attacks the guards to buy Trice time to get inside, but he's badly wounded in the process. His sacrifice clears her path, and she enters headquarters alone, carrying the weight of both her parents' losses with her. Inside the control room, Jeanine is preparing to launch the final phase of the abnegation purge. To keep anyone from interfering, she's placed 4 into a special simulation, but because his divergent mind resisted the standard method, she's used a stronger version that's turned him against the person he loves most. Trice tries to reach him, but he attacks her with terrifying aggression, no longer recognizing her as anything but a threat. Refusing to kill him, she realizes the only way through is to reach the real 4 buried underneath the control, triggering one of his deepest fears by making him believe he's being forced to kill an innocent person. When he finally turns his gun on her, she stops fighting back and speaks to him honestly, telling him she knows who he is, that she understands him, and that she loves him. Slowly, her words break through, and 4 fights his way free of the simulation. Once he regains control, he turns on the erudite soldiers in the room while Trice goes after Jeanine directly. She throws a dagger, pinning Jeanine's hand to the control monitor to hold her in place, but Jeanine still refuses to shut the program down, instead pushing it toward a destructive final stage. Trice finds another way to stop her, She injects Jeanine with the same mind control serum and turns the system against her. Now forced into obedience, a horrified Jeanine watches her entire plan collapse as Trice orders her to delete the program, breaking the hold over every controlled dauntless soldier. Across abnegation, the soldiers snap out of it, no longer a threat to anyone. With the massacre stopped, Trice knocks Jeanine unconscious and escapes with her allies. By the end, Trice, Caleb, Marcus, and Peter have nowhere safe left to go. They've lost their families, their factions, and their place in the world. Fugitives now, with more conflict almost certainly waiting ahead. For the moment, though, they board a train together and ride off toward whatever comes next. Looking back at Divergent, when Divergent hit theaters in 2014, it landed right in the thick of Hollywood's obsession with finding the next great young adult franchise. You probably remember that stretch of years every few months brought another movie about a special teenager navigating a broken future society, an oppressive system, and a plot clearly built to stretch across 3 or 4 sequels. Studios had watched The Hunger Games explode into a massive hit with a fiercely loyal fan base, and suddenly everyone wanted their own slice of that success. That ambition is the first thing you notice about Divergent. Before the story even settles in, you can feel the franchise machinery humming beneath it. This isn't just a movie, it's trying to build a world, establish rules, introduce characters who'll clearly matter later, and convince you this is only chapter 1 of something much bigger. That doesn't automatically make it bad. Plenty of good films are designed to kick off a franchise, but with Divergent, that intention is impossible to miss. Looking back, 2014 was an interesting moment for this kind of story. Audiences still had a real appetite for adaptations. The formula was familiar but hadn't worn out its welcome yet. So when Divergent rolled in with its divided society, its teenage heroine, her hidden identity, and the promise of rebellion, it felt very much like a product of its era. Lionsgate in particular understood the value of turning a story into a brand, and with major franchise momentum already behind them, Divergent looked like a natural next piece of that puzzle. A built-in book fanbase, an appealing young cast, a dystopian backdrop, romantic tension, action, political stakes. Everything a studio could want if it were trying to build a long-running series. That's also where the film runs into its first real problem. Instead of feeling like a fresh story that simply happens to have sequel potential, Divergent sometimes feels like the sequel potential came first, and the movie had to carry all that setup on its back. You can sense it in how the factions get introduced, in how carefully the rules of the world are explained, in the way certain characters are clearly being positioned for later. There's a constant undercurrent asking not just are you enjoying this story, but are you ready to buy into this universe? And depending on your mood, that can feel either exciting or a little exhausting. If you were already a fan of this genre, Divergent probably felt like a compelling new world to step into, full of mystery, romance, and danger. But if you were already tired of the dystopia wave, it likely read less like something bold and new and more like Hollywood repeating a formula that had already worked elsewhere. That context matters because Divergent isn't just about Trice choosing a faction. It's shaped by the business climate that produced it. It came out of an era when studios weren't just hunting for good stories, they wanted sagas, complete with rules, symbols, teams, identities, romance, and just enough unanswered questions to guarantee people would come back. Divergent checks every one of those boxes. Whether it uses them well is a separate question, but as a franchise starter, its intentions are obvious. It's chasing that same teenage hunger for identity, rebellion, and belonging that made other franchises so successful. And even with all that calculation on display, the movie still has a hook. There's something instantly compelling about a society that dictates exactly who you're allowed to become. That's why, trend or not, Divergent still manages to pull people in. Teenagers love stories about being told they don't fit and then discovering that not fitting might be their greatest strength. The bigger issue with Divergent isn't that its setup feels familiar. Plenty of familiar stories still work beautifully. The problem is that the film often seems fully aware of exactly which lane it's driving in, and rarely tries to swerve out of it. A tightly controlled future society, an ordinary girl, a system that insists everyone has one fixed place. Then, inevitably, she discovers she's different in a way the system can't handle, and suddenly she's not just another teenager, she's a threat, the crack in the wall. The one person this perfectly organized world fears most. That's compelling material. And there's a reason ideas like this resonate, especially with younger viewers, that feeling of being watched, sorted, and labeled before you even know who you are is powerful. But with Divergent, you frequently sense you've already seen the shape of this movie before it finishes drawing itself. It's hard not to think of The Hunger Games, a future society, young people trapped in a brutal system. A heroine who becomes far more important than she expected. A ruling class terrified of rebellion. The parallels aren't exactly subtle, even with different details. Then there's the faction system itself, which almost inevitably invites comparisons to Harry Potter's house sorting. Except here, instead of just determining your dorm, your faction decides your entire life. The movie darkens that idea considerably, making it more political and far more permanent. There are also echoes of older dystopian classics, particularly stories built around rigid social classes, which is where something like Brave New World comes to mind. People organized, trained, and conditioned to accept a structure that looks peaceful from the outside but is deeply unnatural underneath. So the film isn't short on influences, and the issue is that those influences are often too easy to spot. And that's where Divergent starts to struggle. It wants to feel like a bold new world, but a lot of the time it plays like a remix of ideas that already worked somewhere else. It has its own names, symbols, and rules, but the underlying bones of the story are very familiar. A girl who's different, a system that fears difference, training, a mysterious love interest, a hidden truth, rebellion. None of that is inherently bad, but in a film running well over 2 hours, you need more than familiar structure dressed in new labels. You need surprises, sharper characters, and a world specific enough that the comparisons start to fall away. That doesn't always happen here. There are moments where the film does feel like it has something genuinely its own. The idea of being dangerous simply because you can't be categorized is compelling. The fear of not belonging to just one group is a strong theme. The choosing ceremony carries real dramatic weight. And even the basic question, what part of yourself would you commit to living by forever, is a solid hook. But the film keeps drifting back into familiar territory, training montages, romantic tension, a hidden identity, a scheming authority figure, chosen one energy. It's all delivered with plenty of seriousness, but not always much freshness, which is why some viewers see the film as derivative. It's not empty of ideas, but it is heavily shaped by the success of the franchises that came before it, chasing the same audience, the same mood, the same image of a young heroine standing up to a broken system. None of that makes the film worthless, though. This is where things get more interesting, because even though Divergent isn't as original as it seems to think it is, it's still watchable. Plenty of people genuinely enjoy this exact kind of story. And if the characters click for you and the faction concept pulls you in, the lack of originality might not matter much. For me, the film's biggest weakness is wanting the payoff of a genuinely fresh dystopia without fully earning that freshness. It borrows the feel of rebellion and the shape of a franchise origin story without consistently pushing those pieces somewhere surprising. So Divergent ends up in an odd place. It's not boring, because it has ideas, some genuinely good ones, but it is predictable, because you can feel the formula humming underneath nearly every scene. Which is the frustrating part. This is a movie literally about a girl who refuses to fit into a single category, made by a film that fits very neatly into one. Building the world once you move past the franchise era feel, Divergent wastes no time laying out its world. We're in a future, ruined version of Chicago, not the sleek, gleaming future of most sci-fi, but a damaged city that's clearly survived something catastrophic. There was a war, society collapsed in some form, and the survivors built a closed-off system meant to keep everything stable. Their solution: divide everyone into factions. That's the foundation of the entire film. Instead of ordinary jobs or communities, people are sorted by one defining virtue. Abnegation values selflessness. Its members live simply, avoid vanity, and also happen to run the government. Amity is the peaceful, kind faction, mostly tied to farming and harmony. Candor prizes honesty above nearly everything else. Dauntless represents bravery. Are the protectors, the ones sprinting across rooftops and leaping from trains, treating courage like a full-time job. And erudite is the intellectual faction. Are the thinkers and scientists. On paper, it's a clean, almost too clean setup. You understand it instantly without needing scene after scene of explanation. Abnegation reads as restraint, dauntless as danger, erudite as control through intellect. That simplicity makes the world easy to follow, but it's also where the cracks start to show, because the more you sit with this world, the stranger it becomes. Building an entire civilization around 5 personality types is an interesting narrative device, but as an actual society, it's hard to buy. People are messy. Nobody is purely brave, or purely honest, or purely kind. Most people are a shifting mix depending on the situation. So when the film asks us to accept that people can live under a single label for their entire lives, it's asking for a pretty significant leap. Still, the movie does get one thing right: the factions create real pressure. At 16, everyone takes an aptitude test suggesting which faction suits them best, though the final choice is theirs and it's permanent. Family, identity, your whole future can change in a single moment, which gives the choosing ceremony genuine dramatic stakes. It's not just a school placement, it's closer to choosing your entire life in front of everyone you know. For Trice, that pressure is even heavier, torn between the abnegation upbringing that shaped her and the pull she feels toward Dauntless. Then there's the factionless, and that's where the world turns genuinely dark. Fail to belong, or fail to survive the faction you picked, and you don't get a second chance somewhere else. You become factionless, pushed to the margins of society and treated as a failure. The film doesn't spend nearly as much time on them as it probably should, but even in the background, their presence adds a quiet cruelty to the setup. This isn't just a story about identity anymore, it's about punishment. The factions are framed as the key to peace after disaster, but underneath that peace is fear. A fear of choosing wrong, fear of not fitting in, fear of being cast out of the only social structure that exists. That's what makes the premise work, at least at first. The world isn't fully believable, but it's emotionally easy to grasp. The idea of being sorted and forced to define yourself before you're ready is something a lot of people, especially teenagers, connect with instantly. The film is essentially asking, what if society didn't just pressure you to decide who you are, but made that decision permanent? That's a strong hook, and once Trice enters the story, it becomes personal. She isn't just living inside this system, she's about to be tested, labeled, and possibly destroyed by it. Whatever the world building's flaws, the setup gives the film plenty to work with. The appeal and the limits of the faction system. What makes Divergent an easy sell is the faction concept itself. Even before you care about Trice, before the conspiracy kicks in, before the romance and training and action, the film has one immediately understandable idea: what if society forced every person to live by a single defining trait? That's an inherently clickable concept, and it's probably the reason the story caught on in the first place. The moment you hear about the factions, your brain starts playing along. Would you be dauntless, erudite? Could you survive abnegation? Would Candace's bluntness wear you down? Would Amity's peace start to feel suffocating after a few days? The movie doesn't even need to ask outright how the structure naturally invites you to place yourself somewhere inside it, which is smart world building for a YA franchise, because it hands the audience a built-in identity system to argue and compare notes over. The factions are simple A, maybe too simple A, but memorable. Abnegation means selflessness, dauntless means bravery, erudite means intelligence, candor means honesty, amity means peace. You don't need an elaborate explanation to grasp what each group stands for, and that clarity matters in a story like this. A fictional world can be layered, but if audiences can't grasp its rules quickly, they'll disengage. Divergent doesn't have that problem early on. Its labels and pressures are immediately clear. But that same clarity becomes a liability once you stop playing the which faction would I choose game and start actually examining the setup. Human beings aren't that clean. No one is purely brave, or purely honest, or purely kind. Even the most selfless person has selfish moments, even the smartest person acts irrationally sometimes, even the bravest person feels fear. So the faction system works far better as metaphor than as a believable society. As a metaphor, though, it's genuinely effective. It captures the pressure of being reduced to a label, turning personality into permanent destiny, and it takes a very real teenage fear, being boiled down to one thing, and makes it literal, political, and lasting. People do this to each other constantly in smaller ways. Deciding someone is the quiet one or the troublemaker. And once a label sticks, it's hard to shake. Divergent just scales that feeling up to an entire civilization, which is why the idea still resonates even when the logic underneath it doesn't quite hold up. You may not believe an entire city could actually function this way, but you understand exactly what the story is expressing. Choose one version of yourself, and live inside it forever. Trice becomes compelling precisely because she can't do that. She was never built for one box. The faction system also hands the film a clean source of conflict. If everyone has an assigned place, then whoever doesn't fit becomes dangerous. Say not through violence or ambition, but simply by existing, because her existence proves the system is lying. That's a strong idea, one the film doesn't always dig into as deeply as it could, but the foundation is solid. Divergents are feared because they expose a crack in the entire structure. If one person can belong to more than one category, maybe the categories were never real to begin with. And if that's true, the whole society is built on a false premise. That's what elevates the faction system beyond a cool gimmick. At its best, it's really about control, about making people easy to manage by convincing them they're simple. Convince someone they're only one thing, and you can predict them, use them, keep them exactly where you want them, which is exactly why Trice becomes such a problem. Even so, the film sometimes gets distracted from the most interesting part of its own premise. Rather than digging into how each faction actually thinks, lives, and justifies itself, or how people emotionally cope with being locked into a single identity, the movie often treats the factions as backdrop for training, romance, and action. That's not necessarily a flaw. 2-hour film can't spend all its time on political theory, but you do feel the missed potential. The concept is compelling enough that you want more everyday life, more tension between the groups, more sense of how people genuinely feel being locked into one identity forever, because the idea is arguably stronger than the movie built round it. That's the strange contradiction at the heart of Divergent. Even when it's being predictable, even when its world building raises obvious questions, the faction system keeps pulling you back in. It gives the movie a clear identity, gives the audience something to hold on to, and gives Trice's journey a defined shape. Yes, it's unrealistic. Yes, it's oversimplified. Yes, it probably falls apart the longer you think about it, but as a hook, it works. It makes the world instantly readable, makes the central conflict personal, and turns an ordinary fear being told who you are into the foundation of an entire dystopia, where the world building runs into trouble. This is where Divergent starts to strain under its own premise. The faction system is a great hook, easy to grasp, easy to market, easy to remember. But the moment you start treating it as a real society rather than a symbolic device, it becomes much harder to accept. Because this world asks a lot of patience from its audience. We're told that after some devastating war, Chicago's survivors built this new structure to preserve peace, which is plausible enough on its own. Societies really do create systems and hierarchies out of fear of returning chaos. But then the film asks us to believe the solution was organizing all of civilization around 5 personality traits. And that's where you start to pause. Who decided this? How did everyone agree? Was there no resistance? No one arguing that basing an entire society on 5 personality types might be a terrible idea? The film doesn't give us that history, it simply drops us into the system once it's already normalized. That can work if the world feels sturdy enough on its own. But the questions keep piling up given how extreme the system is. Why only these 5 traits? Selflessness, bravery, intelligence, honesty, and kindness are all valuable qualities, sure, but are they really the only ones worth organizing a civilization around? What about creativity, patience, leadership, curiosity, or loyalty? What about people who are practical, technical, artistic, or simply skilled at essential everyday work? The film hands us 5 tidy labels, but real societies are never that clean. And then there's the question of actual professions. Amity grows food, Dauntless protects the city, Abnegation governs, Erudite handles science, Candor seems tied to truth and justice. But where are the doctors, the engineers, the artists? The people repairing the city or teaching children or making medicine? The book may answer some of this, but judged purely as a film, the world feels underexplained. That matters because the story needs us to believe in this society enough to fear losing it, and a dystopia doesn't need to be realistic in every detail, but it does need to feel internally convincing. You need to believe the people trapped inside it would accept it, or at least understand why they can't escape. Divergent often plays more like a personality quiz concept stretched into a civilization than an actual lived-in world. Other factions are emotionally clear but practically confusing. Even the concept of divergence itself raises questions. The film treats it as rare because divergents show strength across multiple traits. But would that genuinely be uncommon? Most people are naturally a mix. Brave people can also be smart, kind people can also be blunt, selfless people can also be bold. The idea that only a few people contain more than one quality almost makes the rest of society feel artificial by comparison. Maybe that's intentional. Maybe the system is meant to feel unnatural. But the film doesn't always frame it with enough precision. It wants the faction system to work simultaneously as a clever world-building device and as a dangerous social lie. And sometimes it leans so hard into the former that the latter becomes obvious too early. Instead of gradually discovering the system is broken, we're often sitting there from the start thinking, well, of course this doesn't work. Which softens both the mystery and the sense of threat. A dystopia built on control needs to feel disturbingly plausible. You need to understand how ordinary people got trapped inside it. Here, that bridge is often missing. We know there was a war, we know the city is damaged, we know the factions exist to prevent conflict, but we rarely feel the historical trauma that made people accept this system, or see enough daily life to understand why they still believe in it. The world has rules, but not always roots. That's frustrating, because Divergent has genuinely interesting ideas buried in there. A society trying to erase complexity, a government afraid of independent thought, a culture where people willingly shrink themselves down to a single trait. All of that could be fascinating and unsettling. But the film often stops at the surface, establishing the system and the ceremony before moving quickly into crisis training, leaving the larger world feeling more like a backdrop than a fully realized place. To be fair, not every viewer will care. Watched purely as a adventure, these gaps may not bother you much. Other rules are clear enough to follow, and the emotional metaphor lands regardless. But if you're the type who starts poking at the logic, the film gives you plenty to get stuck on. The faction system works beautifully as symbol, as teen identity metaphor, as a clean narrative engine, but as an actual society, it's shaky. The world is interesting enough to spark curiosity, but not developed enough to satisfy it. It opens the door to big questions and then walks right past most of them in favor of draining romance and franchise setup. The Factionless, a missed opportunity. One of the darker ideas in Divergent is also one of its most underused. The Factionless. Once you understand how this society actually functions, they're not just background extras meant to make the world look harsher. They're proof the system was already cruel long before any conspiracy surfaces. We're told that failing to belong to a faction, or failing after choosing one, means becoming factionless. Simple enough on the surface, a warning built right into the rules: choose carefully, train hard, don't fail. But sit with it for a moment and it's genuinely horrifying. This society claims to be built on peace and order after a devastating war, presenting the factions as the only way to keep people from destroying each other again. Yet right underneath the tidy structure sits an entire class of people who've been completely expelled from it, and almost nobody seems disturbed by that. That's what makes the Factionless so compelling. Their existence exposes the lie at the heart of the world. The factions promise belonging but manufacture exclusion. They claim to give people identity while punishing anyone who can't survive inside it. They're framed as preventing chaos while quietly producing suffering and blaming the people who failed. For Trice, the threat of becoming factionless during her dauntless training is never abstract. It's not embarrassment or a lost competition. It's the disappearance of her entire future. There's no going home to start over, no second choice. That gives every fight, every test, every ranking a sharper edge. It's not just about proving bravery, it's about avoiding social death. And honestly, that idea could have hit even harder if the film had spent more time actually showing what factionless life looks like. We see enough to know they're treated poorly, but not enough to feel the weight of it. How they function more as a warning than as people. That feels like a missed opportunity, because the Factionless could have made this world feel far more real by showing the human cost of the system, not through speeches, but through ordinary lives wrecked by a single failed choice. People who weren't brave enough for dauntless. People who couldn't be selfless enough for abnegation. People who didn't fit cleanly anywhere, but weren't considered special enough to be feared as divergent. That distinction matters. Divergents are hunted because their difference carries power, while the factionless are ignored because their difference has already been crushed into failure. One group is feared, the other abandoned, but the underlying message is identical. If you don't fit the box society hands you, you're not safe. That turns the faction system into something closer to a class system than a personality framework. It's not just about who you are, but where you're allowed to stand. Faction members have purpose, food, status, protection. The factionless have almost nothing, sitting at the bottom of a world that insists everyone has a place. The film could have leaned on the factionless to deepen its political dimension instead of leaning almost entirely on Erudite as the obvious villain, showing that the entire system is already violent in quieter, more bureaucratic ways. And no coup required, no soldiers marching through the streets, just the simple, cold rule that one failure can erase you from society. That kind of dystopia is often scarier than an obvious villain, because it doesn't look like madness to the people living inside it. It looks like order, a phrase like faction before blood repeated as though it's simply how life works. The factionless are, in a real sense, the shadow hanging over every choice in the film. When Trice chooses Dauntless, she isn't just chasing bravery, she's gambling her entire existence. If she can't become what Dauntless demands, she loses everything. And not everyone wins that gamble. Not everyone is Trice. Not everyone has a hidden divergent edge. Some people simply fail, fall, and get pushed out while the system keeps humming along, still calling itself peaceful. Had the film leaned further into that idea, the rebellion at its center could have felt less like Trice's personal survival story and more like a reckoning for every person damaged by a society that only values people who fit its design. Even treated as background, though, the concept works. It adds a quiet bitterness that lingers under the ceremonies, the faction colors, the tests, and the clean language of virtue, reminding us this world is built on exclusion. A society that manufactures belonging by discarding everyone who fails was never truly peaceful. They only organized. A city worth believing in. One place Divergent genuinely succeeds, even when the broader world building wobbles, is in the way future Chicago looks. This isn't a shiny, glowing sci-fi metropolis. Say it's a broken, half-abandoned place that clearly used to be alive and powerful before something terrible happened long enough ago that nature has started reclaiming it. That image works. There's something compelling about presenting Chicago not as a futuristic paradise but as a wounded city. Buildings still standing but tired, streets still there but not fully alive, huge stretches gone overgrown and half forgotten, as though the human world lost its grip and nature crept back in through the cracks. Those visual details often do more heavy lifting than the film's exposition. The damaged skyline and empty spaces give the world a sense of history, even though the war itself is never explained in much depth. The drained Lake Michigan is one of the more memorable touches, a background detail that instantly signals this isn't the Chicago we know, without needing a character to stop and explain why. The film doesn't dig deeply into the cause, but as an image, it carries real weight. This is where Divergent is visually at its strongest, not in the clean faction interiors, not always in the action, but in the wider view of the city itself. The ruined setting gives Trice's world scale, making it feel bigger than her training class, bigger than Dauntless, bigger than the abnegation erudite power struggle. There's an entire damaged civilization surrounding these characters, and even if the script doesn't fully explore it, the city keeps reminding you this story unfolds in the aftermath of something enormous. There's also a nice contrast built in. The factions represent order, labels, and rigid categories, while the city itself looks cracked, overgrown, and unstable. People trying to impose a perfect structure onto a broken world. That's a stronger idea than the film always seems to realize. Does the movie fully capitalize on that setting? Not really. The environment often reads more like a backdrop than a living part of the story. You want more time in this ruined Chicago, more sense of how each faction occupies it differently, more feel for what daily life actually looks like in these damaged spaces, a city with its own history rather than just a cool location. Still, even with that limitation, it gives the film real atmosphere, and the Dauntless scenes especially benefit from it. The trains that never fully stop, the rooftop jumps, the climbing and sprinting through industrial ruins all suit a faction that treats danger as a lifestyle. It can look a little silly at times, sure, but it gives Dauntless real energy, almost as if they've turned the city's ruins into their own personal playground and training ground. The overall visual design isn't perfect, though some spaces are far more memorable than others. The broken city has real personality. A lot of the interior spaces feel too plain, too safe, as if the film wanted to suggest a dystopian future without fully committing to a bold visual identity. From a distance, Divergent can look genuinely impressive. The wide shots of Chicago, the decay, the sense of urban collapse are strong, but up close, things can feel less imaginative. There's enough visual detail to sell the idea of destruction, but not always enough to convince you this society has been shaped by decades of living inside it. Even so, the future Chicago setting is one of the film's better assets. It gives the story something physical to hold on to, and even when the faction logic feels shaky, the city sets a mood that speaks for itself. a world built after failure, trying to control human nature out of fear of another collapse. The overgrown streets, the drained lake, the rough industrial corridors all combine into a version of Chicago that feels wounded and strange, and just believable enough to keep your imagination engaged. In a movie that explains so much through labels and rules, it's refreshing when the visuals are allowed to do some of the talking themselves. Costumes and faction design. This is where Divergent becomes a bit frustrating visually, because the concept practically begs for bold design choices. 5 factions, each anchored to a different value: a selflessness, bravery, intelligence, honesty. Peace should offer enormous room to play with costume, architecture, color, and movement. To its credit, the film does try. Abnegation wears plain gray, deliberately stripped of vanity or flash. Dauntless is darker and rougher, built around physicality. Erudite looks sleek and sharp, meant to suggest intellect and cold control. Amity feels softer and warmer. Candor carries its own formal, honesty-driven look. So yes, you can tell the factions apart at a glance, but that's also the problem. You can tell them apart without ever really feeling them. The designs are readable but rarely bold. They communicate the basic idea without much surprise. Abnegation looks plain because its members are selfless. Dauntless looks edgy because its members are brave. Erudite looks polished because its members are intellectual. It's all very literal. Maybe too literal. There's nothing inherently wrong with simple design, especially in a film already juggling a lot of world building, but in a society entirely organized around identity, you want that identity to feel lived in, not just a color palette and a personality label, but history, ritual, and contradiction. That's where Divergent falls short of its own potential. A faction-based society should feel visually rich. The clothing should hint at how these people think. The spaces should reveal what they value. The smallest details should explain why belonging feels either like pride or like a trap. The film often settles for broad shorthand instead, sometimes a little too safely. Take Erudite, for instance, a faction meant to represent intelligence and, eventually, cold authoritarian power. Jeanine, played by Kate Winslet, should visually read as someone who's converted intellect into total control, but her look is fairly ordinary, closer to a corporate executive walking into a boardroom than the face of a terrifying dystopian regime. That restraint can work. There's a certain believability to power looking calm and professional rather than theatrical. But in a world already asking us to buy into big symbolic divisions, her visual identity could have carried more weight. The same goes for the faction environments, generally understandable, but rarely unforgettable. You could describe each faction easily after watching the film, but you don't always feel a deep visual distinction between them. That's part of why the ruined city ends up more visually interesting than the society built inside it. It has decay, texture, mood, while the faction spaces often feel a bit too clean or too basic by comparison. It's not disastrous. The film is polished overall, and there are strong images throughout, especially in the wide city shots and much of the Dauntless material. But the art direction rarely pushes the premise as far as it could. Compared to something like The Hunger Games, with its much bolder, more exaggerated visual identity, strange, glamorous, ugly, colorful, and disturbing all at once. Divergent is far more restrained. Sometimes that restraint helps, keeping the world from feeling cartoonish, but it also occasionally makes it feel less imaginative. A society built entirely around personality-driven factions probably shouldn't feel visually ordinary. Every part of daily life, from clothing to architecture to gesture, should carry the weight of that ideology. Here, the ideology is clear, but the visual culture underneath it feels thin. Dauntless comes closest to landing this, because its identity is inherently physical, jumping trains, climbing, fighting, turning the city into an obstacle course, so its world naturally feels more alive. You understand them through action, not just costume. Abnegation works too, in its own basic way. since their plainness is essentially the point A. Though even there, the film doesn't dig deeply into what it actually feels like to live inside that kind of self-erasing culture. The other factions remain thinner. You understand what they stand for without ever really living inside their world beyond the label. That's the missed opportunity. Art direction could have answered a lot of the world-building questions the script leaves hanging, showing us A rather than telling us A how these values shape daily life, food, work, decoration, child-rearing, and power. Instead, the film often gives us something functional rather than unforgettable. It tells us where everyone belongs without always making us feel the emotional weight of that belonging, which matters enormously in a story fundamentally about identity. If people are being forced into categories, those categories should feel both seductive and frightening. The costumes gesture toward that idea without ever quite capturing it. Visually, then, Divergent isn't a failure. It's polished, clear, and occasionally striking, but it also feels like a film that could have looked far more distinctive if it had trusted the strangeness of its own premise a little more. The factions are easy to recognize. They're just not always easy to remember. Trice holds it together for all the criticism Divergent draws. It has one crucial thing keeping it from falling apart entirely: Trice. If she doesn't work, the whole movie collapses. The world can be interesting, the factions clever, the action decent, but the entire story hinges on one girl trying to figure out who she is while everyone around her keeps insisting they already know. If we don't care about that struggle, the faction system is just set dressing. Shailene Woodley does a lot of heavy lifting here. Trice starts the story as Beatrice Pryor, raised in abnegation, surrounded by selflessness, modesty, and emotional restraint. She's not introduced as an obvious action hero, and no swagger, no loud rebellion from scene one. She's unsure, curious, and quietly out of place, without ever feeling artificially special. That matters, because a lot of YA stories fall into the trap of insisting their heroine is ordinary while filming her like the most important person alive from the very first scene. Divergent leans into the trope occasionally too, but Woodley gives Trice enough hesitation and awkwardness to keep her grounded. You believe she's grown up somewhere, that wanting more than your assigned place feels almost shameful. There's something quietly compelling about her early scenes. She watches Dauntless with real fascination but isn't fully dauntless herself. She loves her family but never quite fits into abnegation either. Stuck in that uncomfortable middle ground where staying feels dishonest and leaving feels like betrayal. That tension gives her early arc genuine weight. Choosing Dauntless isn't just a rebellious, cool moment. It's a real break from her family, her upbringing, and the version of herself everyone expected her to become, with real consequences. She isn't just picking a faction, she's choosing uncertainty, which makes her more compelling than if she were simply chasing adventure. What really works is that Trice is brave without being instantly strong, an important distinction. The film doesn't hand her dominance the moment she walks into Dauntless. She struggles, loses, gets hurt, doubts herself, and often looks completely out of her depth, which makes her eventual progress far more satisfying. We're watching a scared young woman trying to survive a rougher world than she expected, not a secret superhero going through the motions. And Woodley sells that vulnerability well. She can look frightened without reading as weak, and determined without reading as invincible, which suits a character meant to hold multiple, sometimes contradictory qualities at once. She isn't only brave, only selfless, or only smart. She's messy, conflicted, and still figuring herself out, which is exactly what makes her a strong center for this story. Her divergence isn't just a plot twist, it mirrors how she's felt all along. Abnegation shaped her without fully defining her. Dauntless draws her in without fully explaining her. She lives somewhere between fear and courage, family loyalty and independence, obedience and resistance, and that internal conflict is often more compelling than the larger political machinery around her. The film is at its best when it stays close to her experience, her anxiety before the choosing ceremony, Her panic in training, her fear of being discovered, her effort to appear normal when normal is the one thing she can't be. These are the scenes where the story feels personal rather than mechanical, and probably why so many viewers connect with her. Trice isn't the most original heroine, never an ordinary girl. Hidden identity, dangerous system, romantic mentor, rebellion. We've seen this shape before. But Woodley brings enough sincerity to the role that the familiarity doesn't sink it. You feel like Trice is genuinely trying, not performing heroism for the camera. There's something relatable, too, in how uncomfortable she is with being watched and judged. Dauntless is built entirely around public performance. Everyone ranked, everyone tested, everyone measured, which is terrifying for someone raised to disappear into selflessness. Suddenly she has to fight, fail, and prove herself in front of an audience with little patience for weakness. That shift is one of the stronger threads in the film. Trice isn't just changing factions, she's changing how she exists in the world. In Abnegation, she was taught not to take up space. In Dauntless, she has to fight for it. A strong character journey, even if it's delivered through fairly familiar training sequences. Her vulnerability also makes the action land harder. When she's thrown into fights or tests, victory never feels guaranteed in the moment, even though we know structurally she's not going anywhere. Emotionally, though, she sells real danger. She looks like someone who can genuinely be hurt, still learning where her own strength actually comes from, which is far more engaging than a character who arrives fully formed. At the same time, the film does occasionally nudge her toward the more familiar chosen one territory. The more the plot underlines how important divergents are, the more she becomes the special figure the system fears, which is expected for this genre but noticeably less interesting than the earlier, more uncertain version of her. The smaller Trice, confused, flawed, scared is more compelling than the mythic Trice. When the film lets her stay human, she feels real. When it starts framing her as the key to everything, she becomes more predictable, not bad exactly, just more familiar. That's the constant push and pull in Divergent. The character wants complexity, but the genre keeps tugging her toward formula. Still, Trice works because her core conflict is crystal clear. She's trying to survive a system demanding she be simple, and every step of her journey pushes back against that. She leaves Abnegation without abandoning selflessness. She joins Dauntless without becoming heartless. She learns to fight without losing her fear. She grows stronger without losing her humanity. That's the part the film gets right. Trice isn't compelling because she's the most powerful person in the room, but because she's still in the process of becoming herself, making choices before she fully understands their cost, trying to look brave while carrying real fear, trying to belong somewhere without giving up the parts of herself that don't quite fit. That's a very human through line. So even when Divergent leans too hard into familiar territory, runs long, or gets distracted setting up its sequels, Trice gives the film an emotional spine worth following. She's the reason the faction system carries stakes, the reason the training matters, the reason Divergence feels personal rather than abstract. Without her, this is just a world full of rules. With her, it becomes a story about a young woman slowly realizing that the very thing making her dangerous to the system might also be the thing that makes her whole. What Divergent actually means. The word divergent is the entire selling point of the movie, and what's interesting is that it's never really treated like a superpower in the usual sense. Trice doesn't discover she can fly or manifest some glowing ability. She doesn't become dangerous because she's stronger than everyone else. She becomes dangerous because the system simply can't explain her, and that's the part of the concept that genuinely works. In this world, control depends entirely on categories. Everyone has a place, a label, a faction, a predictable set of values. The whole society runs on the belief that people can be sorted, understood, and managed. Then Trice comes along, and her test essentially says, no, She isn't that simple. That's why divergents are feared, not because they're inherently violent or plotting to tear the city down, but because their very existence proves the system is built on a lie. If one person can belong to more than one category, maybe the categories were never natural to begin with. That's a genuinely strong idea for a young story, because being a teenager often feels exactly like that. Everyone around you, parents, schools, friends, has already decided who they think you are: the smart one, the quiet one, the difficult one, the good one, the strange one. And once that label sticks, you're expected to live inside it. Divergent takes that feeling and makes it literal. Being more than one thing isn't normal here, it's dangerous, something to hide. That reframes Trice's identity as a threat rather than a gift. The moment she discovers it, she isn't celebrated, she's warned, told to stay quiet, told that discovery could get her killed. That shifts the whole tone of her journey. This isn't simply a story about learning you're special, it's a story about learning that being yourself might put you in real danger. Because Trice doesn't fully understand what being divergent means, only that she has to hide it. Every test and training exercise becomes a risk. She can't simply try to win, she has to survive without revealing the truth. That gives the film some of its sharp attention, and the fear simulations especially demonstrate why divergence matters so much. The system expects fear to behave predictably and expects minds to be controllable. But Trice doesn't move through the tests the way she's supposed to. She adapts, breaks through, refuses to follow the assigned pattern. That's the real threat. A society controls people more easily when their reactions are predictable, and someone who can think outside that pattern becomes much harder to manipulate. That's exactly what unsettles Jeanine and the people protecting the system. Divergents aren't just different personalities, they're independent wills, and while the film is sometimes almost too on the nose about that point, the idea still lands. Divergence means complexity, contradiction, a person who can't be reduced to one useful function. And in this world, complexity itself is rebellion. That's where the film's political undercurrent comes through most clearly. The faction system doesn't just organize people, it simplifies them, making society easy to control by convincing everyone they're only one thing and should stay that way forever. Divergents challenge that by suggesting a far more uncomfortable truth. People aren't tools, aren't categories, aren't single virtues wearing human faces. They're mixed, they change, they contain contradictions. That's exactly why Trice becomes such a problem. She isn't trying to start a revolution. She's not entering Dauntless with a plan to overthrow anyone, she's just trying to live. But even that is threatening, because her existence alone breaks the rules. That's one of the stronger emotional ideas in the film. The system isn't just afraid of what Trice does, it's afraid of what she is, or more precisely, what she reveals. She exposes the fact that this clean, orderly structure is artificial, and once people see that, the whole system weakens. The movie doesn't always dig into this as deeply as it could. Divergence sometimes functions more as a plot device, the secret identity, the reason she's hunted, the thing that makes her important to the wider franchise, than as a fully explored theme. But the metaphor underneath still holds up. Being divergent means refusing to shrink yourself down so the world can more easily understand you, and that's exactly why the idea resonates with the film's target audience. Teenagers are constantly being measured: A grades, cliques, expectations, family and social pressure. And the real fear isn't just failure, it's being trapped in the wrong version of yourself. A story about a girl who refuses to be boxed in naturally has appeal, even when the world building around her is shaky, because the emotion underneath it is real. There's an irony worth noting: by this movie's standards, almost everyone in real life would probably qualify as divergent, since most people genuinely are more than one thing depending on context. So the idea that divergence is rare can feel strange if taken too literally, but as metaphor, it still works. because the rarity was never really the point. The fear was, the system needs divergence to seem rare, because it can't survive if everyone realizes they're more complicated than their faction allows. The real danger was never that a few people are different, it's that everyone might be. Divergent almost fully gets there, and when it does, the film becomes more interesting than its formula would suggest, because Trice's real strength was never that she belongs nowhere. It's that she belongs to more than one part of herself. Training to survive a double danger. What makes Trice's time in Dauntless so compelling isn't just that the training is hard, it's that she has to survive it in an almost impossible way. Most of the other recruits have one clear goal: perform well enough to stay, fight harder, climb faster, prove you belong. Failing means becoming factionless, which is terrifying enough on its own. But Trice carries a second, quieter problem: perform too poorly, and she fails perform too well, and she risks exposing herself. She can't simply train like everyone else and push toward the top, because every time she reacts differently, solves a challenge too quickly, or survives a test in a way that doesn't look normal, she risks revealing that she's divergent. And in this world, that's not just unusual, it's a death sentence. So underneath the surface of a typical underdog story runs a much quieter tension. On the outside, Trice looks like exactly what you'd expect: smaller, less experienced, physically overmatched, forced to fight stronger opponents and take risks that feel reckless just to keep up in a faction seemingly designed to break her. But she's also performing normality the entire time, learning to hide the exact kind of bravery that sets her apart. There's something deeply uncomfortable about that. She finally left the confines of abnegation, the faction where she always felt restricted, and joined the one she was genuinely drawn to. And yet Dauntless becomes a different kind of cage, louder, more violent, but still a cage. Because even here, freedom comes with rules. You can be brave, but only in the sanctioned way. Strong, but not suspiciously strong. You can conquer fear, but not by thinking outside the pattern the system expects. You can belong, but only if you belong correctly. That's a sharp idea, even if the film doesn't always slow down to fully develop it. It's there, quietly running underneath nearly every training scene. Trice is constantly calibrating herself, knowing when to push and when to hold back, needing to look like she's improving through effort rather than revealing something the system was never built to explain. That makes the Dauntless ranking system feel especially cruel for her specifically. Everyone else just faces ordinary stress over a scoreboard. For Trice, it's dangerous in both directions. A rank too low and she's exiled, rank too high and she draws exactly the wrong kind of attention. She's caught between invisibility and survival, and neither one stays safe for long. That's part of why the fear simulations carry so much weight. They're not just clever psychological set pieces, they're where her secret is hardest to hide. In physical fights, losing or winning reads in ways everyone understands. But inside the fear landscapes, her mind simply works differently. She recognizes the artificial nature of the test, adapts, and escapes rather than merely enduring it. To Dauntless at large, that looks impressive. To anyone watching closely, it looks dangerous. And you can feel Trice slowly realizing that being good at this might be exactly what gets her killed. That's a strong contradiction for a character to live inside. The very skills she needs to survive are the ones that could expose her. It's also what deepens her relationship with Thor. He becomes one of the only people who understands she can't simply perform at full capacity without consequences, and his mentorship shifts accordingly. He isn't just training her to win fights or pass tests. He's teaching her how to disguise herself inside a system actively hunting people like her. That reframes where the danger in the story actually lies. It isn't always loud, not just bullets or fists or people falling from ledges. Sometimes it's someone noticing a little too much, asking the wrong question, realizing she shouldn't have been able to do what she just did. For a film that sometimes struggles with sustained suspense, This double danger dynamic is one of its stronger, more reliable sources of tension. It also makes Trice more sympathetic overall. She isn't pushing herself to improve simply because the story needs a training arc. She's trying to stay alive without becoming visible in the wrong way, and every success costs her something while every failure threatens her outright. Even progress is risky. That's a more interesting spin on the underdog formula than usual. Normally in these stories, we want the hero to rise fast, win the fight, climb the ranking, silence the doubters. With Trice, part of you wants her to keep improving, and another part worries the moment she improves too visibly. A strange, effective tension in how we watch her. Victory never feels entirely safe, which fits the film's larger theme. The system doesn't just punish weakness, it also punishes the wrong kind of strength, and that dual threat is exactly what makes it feel oppressive. If Trice only feared failing, the story would be simpler. If she only feared exposure, it would still work on its own. But combining both gives her dauntless arc real shape. She's trapped somewhere she must become brave enough to survive, while staying careful enough not to reveal exactly why she's capable of surviving. The film could have pushed even harder into the psychological exhaustion of constantly hiding, could have made every test feel more dangerous because of what it might reveal, could have turned the whole training sequence into a tighter game where Trice isn't just competing against other recruits but managing her own visibility in real time. Even as it stands, though, the idea works. Her time in Dauntless isn't just about learning to fight, it's about learning the cost of being different inside a world that treats difference like a crime. She has to grow stronger without being too obvious about it, belong without belonging completely, hide without disappearing. That tension is what makes her situation so compelling. For Trice, Dauntless isn't just a faction. It's a test she has to pass without letting anyone see the real answer. The training section, exciting, then exhausting. The Dauntless training stretch is where Divergent really becomes the movie most people remember. Not the politics, not the faction speeches, not even the larger conspiracy at first, but the training itself, jumping onto moving trains, the fights, the rankings, the fear tests. The whole reckless culture of proving bravery by courting danger every few minutes. And depending on your patience for that kind of thing, this section is either where the film gets genuinely exciting or where it starts to drag, because it takes up a huge chunk of the runtime. Once Trice chooses Dauntless, the story settles into a long initiation process where she has to earn her place. Gone is the quiet, controlled world of abnegation. This faction seems to treat danger as a daily routine. Nobody enters a room calmly here. Everyone runs, jumps, climbs, shouts, fights. It's all loud, physical, public, and honestly a little over the top if you think about it too long. But at first, it works. There's real energy in Trice stepping into this world, and the shift in color, noise, and attitude makes it feel like an entirely different movie from where she came from. Abnegation asked her to disappear. Dauntless demands she be seen, judged, tested, ranked. That contrast gives the training section a strong opening. The initiation isn't just about learning to fight, it's about learning how this faction actually thinks. And the version of courage on display here is harsh, almost performative. You're brave if you jump first, brave if you take the hit without flinching, brave if you can turn fear into a spectacle for everyone watching. There's real excitement in that, but also something a bit uglier underneath. And that ugliness matters. Other training scenes gradually reveal that Dauntless isn't simply a cool faction of fearless protectors, but a system that grinds people down. New recruits face violence, humiliation, and constant competition. Their worth measured endlessly, their futures tied directly to their rankings. Fail, and it's not just wounded pride, it's losing your entire place in society. That gives the training real stakes. Every fight matters because failure has consequences, every test matters because someone is always watching, And Trice isn't training purely for personal growth. She's fighting to avoid being erased from the system altogether. That stakes-driven pressure gives even the more familiar training beats extra weight. Still, the film definitely tests your patience here. There's a lot of training, full stop. Punching, running, jumping, climbing, facing fears, getting ranked, getting knocked down, getting back up, over and over. Eventually the repetition becomes noticeable. Following the same basic rhythm, Trice struggles, gets hurt, learns, improves, becomes more noticeable. That structure is clear, but it also grows predictable, and the film leans on the initiation so heavily that the larger plot, the erudite threat, the danger of being divergent, the wider political stakes, mostly waits in the background. For a long stretch, Divergent plays almost like a training movie with dystopian set dressing wrapped round it. To be fair, some of that training genuinely earns its place. We need to watch Trice earn her spot, because if she strolled into Dauntless and instantly dominated, the entire arc would ring false. The film is smarter than that. It lets her struggle, lose, and look physically outmatched, which makes her eventual growth far more satisfying. Shailene Woodley deserves real credit here. She never plays Trice like someone secretly waiting to reveal hidden perfection, but like someone scared, embarrassed, angry, and stubborn all at once. You feel the humiliation when she's knocked down and the genuine effort when she gets back up. And the training section would land much softer without a lead performance selling the pain underneath it. The fear simulations remain the most interesting piece of the initiation, because they push past pure physical survival into something psychological. Fighting is one thing, jumping from a moving train is one thing, but fear tests turn bravery inward, into something the character has to face entirely alone. That's where the film finds a sharper use for the Dauntless concept. Courage here isn't just about absorbing punches, it's about confronting whatever your own mind conjures up when nobody else can help you. These sequences give Trice's arc a more personal edge, especially given how her divergence shapes her responses. They're also what separates her from the other recruits. In the physical stage, she reads as an underdog, but in the fear stage you start to see exactly why she's different. Her mind doesn't simply obey the simulation, she can recognize it, bend it, escape it, turning the training into more than a competition. It becomes a genuine danger zone for her secret. The issue is the film doesn't always build enough suspense around these moments. Some tests should feel genuinely terrifying but move past too quickly, and some challenges should leave real emotional damage, but the story just moves on. The stakes are there, but the storytelling occasionally treats danger as just another stage of the program to check off, which makes the section uneven, exciting and character-driven at its best, stretched and repetitive at its weakest. You understand why the scenes exist, but you also start to suspect a tighter cut could have made the same points with fewer rounds of testing. Then there's the Dauntless lifestyle itself, which manages to be both cool and unintentionally funny at once. All that running and jumping has genuine visual energy, but after a while you start wondering whether these people realize they could just walk sometimes. Every entrance seems required to prove bravery through extremity, which is entertaining but can also make the faction look like it's built entirely around Parker, tattoos, and bad decisions. That doesn't sink the film, but it does make the world feel a little silly at points. Even so, the training gives Divergent its strongest sense of momentum. Without it, the first half would mostly be exposition. The initiation provides physical shape to the story, taking Trice from the bottom through pressure, rule learning, cruelty, and finally into someone capable of surviving inside this faction. That arc is simple, but it's effective, and it gives the audience an easy structure to follow from beginning to end.